There are quite a few wrestling games for the Game Boy. WCW Main Event is one of the exclusives for this system. I'm gonna kind of relax my standards a little bit because this is a Game Boy game. It's not expected to be on the same level as one of the home consoles. It's just going to be a fun distraction from, everything else going on. This game was released in 1994, and it's more of an arcade experience. This is what you would expect from a game in the late 80s and early 90s. So, yeah, there's not a story that's going to be going on, or really anything like that. It's just a bunch of matches. And, it's pretty good for what it is. The gameplay is pretty much what you should expect from a game on the Game Boy. You can play a single or two-player, assuming that you have the necessary equipment to do that, like a second Game Boy, a link cable, and another cartridge. It was seriously a pain in the ass to try to play two-player on the Game Boy. Really a pain in the ass. After you've decided what you want to do, then you've got a few characters that you can pick from. Initially, I thought the roster was pretty good, but I was a little confused why Ric Flair wasn't on the game. It turns out he was in WCW at the time, but he probably wasn't there when they were making this game, and they couldn't add him into it. Something similar happened with the Steiner brothers. Rick and Scott had left the company at this point, but they weren't able to take them out of the game. So you can play as Rick Rude, Ron Simmons, Steve Austin, Sting, Dustin Rhodes, Johnny B. Bad, Vader, Rick, or Scott Steiner. It's a pretty decent roster. After this, you can kind of just decide whether you want to play a single match or if you want to play 3 falls or 5 falls. And then you kind of run out of stuff to do after that. The controls are pretty decent. There are the usual limitations with the Game Boy because they only have so many buttons, so you can't really do anything overly complicated. This is in line with a lot of the other NES games, so you're going to have a lot of basic offense, a lot of the wrestlers are going to play the same, but, at least they look a little bit different, and it can be a fun game to play. If I was on a road trip or something, or going off to Grandma's house, and this was the only thing I had, I would have been pretty happy with it. WCW Main Event is a good-looking game for the Game Boy. The developers managed to make the wrestlers look different, the ring looks pretty good, the crowd looks good. Everything in here looks pretty good for a 1994 Game Boy game. It looks a lot better than some of the WWF games, to be honest. There are the usual limitations you should expect from the Game Boy. The pictures of the characters kind of resemble their real-life counterparts. Thankfully, the developers included the names, so you at least know who each person is supposed to be. I really think this one looks a lot better than some of the WWF games that I played, even on the NES. The game screen, it looks very good. You're given your health, your stamina bar. There's a picture of your character there. You've got the name, so you know who they're supposed to be. It's everything you would expect from a wrestling or a fighting game. The character sprites have this kind of cartoonish look to them, and I kind of like this. I'm not looking for realism in these games. I just want to be entertained for a few minutes. And that's pretty much what this did. By 1994 standards, the Game Boy was very old, but they got the most out of it. It looks really good for a Game Boy game. This is a pretty good Game Boy game. It was a lot of fun to play with, and it would have been a nice distraction from some of the other Game Boy games, like the RPGs and that sort of thing. And if this was all you had in the 90s, you probably would have been happy with it. It would have been a real chore to find somebody else who owned this game in order to play two-player, though. At least it always was for me, because, didn't have the link cable, didn't have a separate cartridge or anything like that, so yeah, I was usually stuck with just single player. I had originally thought this game was released in the late 80s, and to my surprise, it was released in 94. It did make me think a little bit more about the roster, but overall I think that's pretty good. There were a few reviews for this game, but I just kind of ignored them. I couldn't really find anything from 1994. It was mostly modern stuff. Bizarrely, Wikipedia said this game was released on the NES, and I could not find anything that confirmed it. And Wikipedia doesn't provide a source for that, so yeah, just whatever. There is a ROM for an unreleased NES version of a WCW game, but I don't think that this is it. If there is one for it, I could not find it. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.